he's doing something with his hands and something in his hands.
Stimming.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Deputies making that heartbreaking discovery in a body of water behind her home.
Got a kid that fell into a pond, like you tell him.
I've lost my son 5 times. He has never, ever wandered.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the Respect to Stim podcast. My name is Captain Jerry Turning, and I'm going to be your host. In the world, there are wise people, there are influencers, there are amazing people, and there are icons. And today I am privileged to be joined by an icon, Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, it's really good to be here.
Thank you for taking some time, Dr. Grandin. People in the autism community know who you are. Obviously, you're legendary in our community. But as I explained to you, my audience, the people I'm trying to reach, are police and first responders who may not have a direct connection with the autism community, but still, it's critical that they know about this and they learn about this and get educated on what this is and what autism is and how it affects people's behavior. And so at the risk of insulting you, of introducing you, just let me take a few minutes to introduce you to somebody, to the audience out there who may not be as familiar as those of us in the world. Dr. Grandin is a professor at Colorado State University. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And you're a professor of animal behavior.
Yes.
You made Time Magazine's list of 100 most influential people in the world, which is pretty cool. You are in the National Women's Hall of Fame. You have written, I think, 12 books. Is that the accurate number?
Oh, I think I have a few more than that.
Many books on topics of animal behavior and autism alike, and you're considered a renowned expert on both of those topics. Your life story was recently the subject of an Emmy Award-winning movie by HBO. That must have been an incredible experience.
It was. And one of the things that made it come out so good is that Emily Gerson-Sains, the producer, is the mother of an adult autistic that's nonverbal, much more severe autism. And she wanted that movie to be right.
How long did it take to film?
They took about a year getting it filmed. It didn't take that long, but getting the right team together to film it. And Emily Gerson-Sains wanted to make sure she had the right team. And choosing Claire Danes, who sort of became me, it was just kind of weird. I remember listening to a radio show where they interviewed me, and then they had Claire Danes talking from the movie, and it almost mixed us up until I recognized the lines. But she spent hours listening to ancient old VHS tapes I had sent to them, and she became me.
That must have been a surreal experience to go through.
Very, very weird. I remember when I went to the premiere, and it was like going into a strange 60s and 70s time machine. And they did a very good job on having all of the things correct. Like there were no modern-looking athletic shoes in the 60s and 70s.
Wow, interesting.
No backpacks in the 60s and 70s. We carried our books like this.
Like I said, the audience I want to reach here is not your typical audience that you usually speak to.
Yeah.
So I want to take this really basic at first. Can you, in your own words, explain to police, first responders, EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, what is autism and why is it important that they know about this and be educated on this topic?
Well, one of the big problems you can have with an autistic person is when something sudden happens, they freeze. And so one of the most important things is waiting for the person to respond. They're almost like a computer with a really bad internet connection or a phone with one bar of service. It takes time to respond, and which is basically a communication disorder. Also, the people with autism have problems with sensory overload. Things like sirens could actually, cause pain. And so they're going like this and might start screaming out of pain. Autism has all different degrees. You go from Einstein and Thomas Edison to somebody who cannot dress themselves, and it's all called the same thing. But the kind of features that are universal are this tendency to freeze when they get scared and loud noises causing sensory overload. And people say, well, what would that be like? Well, imagine being inside the speaker at the rock and roll concert and everything's on full blast. That's what it would be like.
And we found, and if I hope you agree, or if you do agree, that stress, anxiety, and trauma can exacerbate these sensory challenges, these communication challenges. And unfortunately for police and first responders, that's usually when we're introduced to these people during an event that is traumatic, anxiety inducing.
Well, I know that children have hidden from firefighters all dressed up in a Scott air pack. And one of the things that schools have done is, bring a firefighter in dressed in all that equipment, and that they need to be running to them, not being afraid of it.
Yeah.
You see that, knowledge reduces fear, but even with normal children have hidden from firefighters dressed up in all that equipment. They thought it was a monster or something coming after them. Well, you see the autistic individual is just going to have a magnified version of that.
And a lot of times these fears and these challenges, they don't go away with people on the spectrum. They actually continue into adulthood, and we all have this avatar of children and people.
And there was a sad case where an autistic man was driving to work, limited verbal ability, and a policeman came up to his car and he didn't answer, so the policeman busted the window. And in Texas, they started a program of what they call communication disorder, because you could have a deaf person that wouldn't respond, or you could have someone who's a stutterer or some other thing that doesn't respond, where on the license it's just marked communication disorder. And they're working on training police officers to that, and then even hooking that up to the license plate, so that when the car is pulled over, they know that driver, maybe somebody else could be driving the car, but that driver could have a communication disorder. And one of the biggest problems is not responding quickly. There's a tendency when they get scared to either act out and scream or something like that, or just freeze, just completely get frozen in fear.
And where this gets really dangerous for us is as police officers, especially, we are trained to look for body language, to look for cues, and some of the things they train us to look for in a police academy to signify evasiveness or evidence of guilt or just basic disrespect is not responding, or not making eye contact, or acting atypically. And the good cops out there, the ones who are out there trying to protect society, they are looking and they are actively seeking out cues like that and body language. And what I found is, in this population, these individuals who are on the autism spectrum, a lot of those typical rules kind of don't apply. We have to be a little more open to deviations from the typical.
Well, one of the problems with eye contact is an autistic person, if they were a computer, has a little tiny processor. Okay, if you're into computer geek stuff, I'm an Intel 286, but I have big warehouses full of servers for memory, lots of memory. So there's some people with autism that are very good at things like art, mechanics, or mathematics, relying on memory. Or it's like being one bar service on a phone. Yeah, just try downloading a web page on one bar service. It about doesn't work. And when it does work, it takes a long time. It's slow to respond. And I literally like this thing they did in Texas on a communication disorder, so that a policeman or police officer, when they get the license plate, knows before they approach the vehicle that the person has a communication disorder.
What is your opinion on placing stickers on cars, identifying clothing, T-shirts? There's a privacy concern there. There's an issue we don't want to expose these individuals to possible predators or somebody who might do them harm.
But the thing is, if it's a license plate thing that goes into the police system, that's not a sticker on a car just telling everybody. The policeman has to go into their computer,
right? Maybe
before they even approach the vehicle,
right?
And they would no. It would just be in that system. And there's a lot of things where privacy, it can interfere with things we need to do. Let's take, for example, when I was in elementary school, a lot of kids today that are different get bullied and horribly teased in elementary school. I managed to avoid that. Bullying happened in high school. But in elementary school, my third grade teacher explained to the other students that I had a disability that was not visible, like a wheelchair or crutches or something like that, and they needed to be helping me. Well, they had to tell the other students what basically my problem was, and it's called peer-mediated intervention. Now, you've got some states where they'd be, they're violating this law or that law, or let's say little Jimmy's teasing little Sally or whatever. Well, in the 50s, the moms got together and got some of this stuff straightened out. Now I hear some stuff from some schools in some states that this mom whose kid's getting bullied can't contact another parent. I can tell you, 50 style, bring both parents into the office. And then I just read recently that one of the states decided to get a lot more active on visiting the homes of kids that aren't showing up at school, getting parents together and working some of this stuff out. Yes, little Tommy was being nasty, and it needs to stop.
I wanted to ask you, I've listened to a lot of your interviews, and you speak very openly about your anxiety, especially early on in your childhood and into adulthood. Can you explain a little bit of that, how that anxiety is tied into autism, and how that can kind of be a double whammy for somebody?
It's like my fear system is ramped up and on overdrive. So any little sudden new thing, get a big fear response. Okay, it might be appropriate fear response if a lion started to attack me, but it wouldn't be an appropriate fear response, let's say, if I get pulled over by, for traffic violation. It's a fear response that's out of proportion to the actual threat. Okay, if my house is burning down, yes, I should go into full fear mode. But let's say some other little thing, you shouldn't. And so sudden surprises scare. Real basic principle of autism, sudden surprises scare. So the other thing we need to be doing, and I've recommended this to parents when their kids are learning to drive, is to practice, have a next door neighbor pretend they're a policeman and pull them over and practice how to behave. And this makes it less of a surprise. I think in California, you make sure you put your hands here so the police officer can see your hands, and train the driver on how to behave. And let's say your license was in your backpack on the floor. You don't just suddenly reach for it. You say, "Officer, my license is in the backpack on the floor. I'm going to have to reach for it." So you tell the police officer what you have to do. Maybe my license is in the trunk. They might not be right in my pocket.
I've heard you speak on this quite a bit, and even speaking to education and educating, young children, and how, in your opinion, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you seem to believe that it should be just basically rule-based. Teach them a system of rules and behaviors, and not really rely on intuition and.
It's rule-based, and the thing is, like a police officer interacting with you at a traffic stop, that's a very, kind of scripted thing that you can do. And,
yes.
And you see, the problem with the eye contact is it loads the processor. You see, if I've only got 1.5 bars of service on my phone, that's basically what my brain has, and I do eye contact, I may not be able to access my database, because that eye contact puts a load on my little bitty service I've got. Or if I'm on an old-fashioned computer, it makes it harder to download the web page because I got to access the database. Yeah, it's pretty much rule-based. And so we need to be training autistic students how to behave, just like they're training firefighters have programs to show little kids not to be afraid of somebody dressed up in all that firefighting equipment, because kids have died because they have hid from firefighters.
I've heard you speak of a couple fender benders you've had driving. Have you ever had any interactions with the police? Have you ever been stopped for speeding? Have you ever personally?
Stopped for speeding, and I remember one time I got stopped for speeding in Iowa, and I said, "Okay, you caught me. I'm not going to lie to you." And the police officer said, "You're the only one that hasn't lied to me today. I'm going to let you go."
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliant.
I try to be pretty careful about the traffic rules.
I in my career, I've had a couple of people actually be honest with me and say, "Listen, I just really have to pee." I was driving fast. I really have to go to the bathroom, and that's an automatic freebie. You're not gonna get a ticket if you're that honest with me at a traffic stop.
I've had some things like that, but and I've been in some accidents, and a whole bunch of them were not my fault. I got rear-ended by a black Jeep on I-25. Definitely was not my fault. The police officer came out there, the state trooper, and I pulled over. Some idiot was hauling a U-Haul rental truck, hauling a trailer with a U-Haul rental truck in the left-hand passing lane on I-25. Really stupid. And he stalled out on a hill. It was real icy, and I stopped, and a black Jeep rammed me. And I had some boots in the car. I put those on, and I walked out in the median, and the police officer was on the other side. And he says, I'm going to bring my cruiser over this median. I said, that car's not going to go across this median. He got it stuck down both axles. He had to hire a heavy tow truck to get that cruiser out. I had a four-wheel drive. There was no way I was driving in that mud pit, because I put on my heavy boots that I had, and I walked in it.
Did these events, obviously you have, to a great degree, overcome your anxiety that was debilitating when you were a child. Did these events trigger that? Did you find these to be extremely...
No, I didn't. Accident was definitely not my fault. And then I've had things where I've done some good driving and avoided an accident. Another time I was on I-25, and this car passed me with a little low trailer that had 2x6s on it. No tailgate. One of them slid off. I managed not to hit it.
Do you have any...
I saw it kind of moving in slow motion, and I managed not to hit that 2x6. And then after that, the full fear mode came in, and I had 15 minutes of swearing, which I will not repeat. And I have very descriptive terms for the trailer and the boards and the driver.
I'll bet.
Yeah, definitely he had no business. And when he passed me, the boards came off, because there's no way I'll follow someone who's got a load that I don't think's tied down. He passed me. There's no way the board slid off just as he passed me.
I want to now talk about communication and the communication challenges for somebody. I know it's varied and it's a wide spectrum, but communication challenges is a real issue between law enforcement and
That's correct.
And I've heard you describe these challenges that you dealt with, especially when you were younger, and you said you had a problem understanding the pace of conversations, the give and take.
This is the problem. It gets back to slow processor speed. I'm an Intel 286, so go look up what that is. That's the first personal computer, Intel inside, but I've got tons and tons of memory. Now, when I'm doing my work, like in cattle design, that doesn't load the processor. But the problems with fast-paced conversation, when you get 3 or 4 people together in a rhythmic conversation where they're kind of almost laughing in rhythm, those conversations go so fast I cannot follow them. So what tends to happen to me is I'll find one person at a party and talk to them, and then I'll go talk to somebody else, or if it's a restaurant full of TVs, then I watch one of the TVs.
And I've heard you say
with hearing when there's a lot of background noise. I cannot shut out background noise. If there's a lot of background noise, I am functionally deaf. Always been that way.
And I've heard you describe when you were listening to your parents early on that it was almost gibberish, that you thought they had their own language.
That's what I thought. I thought grown-ups had their own language, because when they talked fast, it went to gibberish, because I've got a bit of an auditory processing disorder. So let's say the parent said, the dog walked down the street, and they said it really fast. I might hear the dog walk down and eat. That might be all, just hearing the vowels. So because if you take a sentence like that and you put it through a sound analyzer, those hard consonants like dog, the D and the G, are less milliseconds than the og, than the vowel.
That's interesting. So is it oversimplifying it to say that a real solid piece of advice to police and first responders, if they are interacting with somebody they suspect or they know is on the spectrum, is basically just slow down, right?
Slow down. That's the thing. It's just like you got a lousy internet connection. It takes time for the web page to download. or you're trying to look something up on your phone and you've got one bar of service. Mine doesn't normally work unless it's just text messaging. I can sometimes call on that web page. It might take a long time to download. Also, this lag where you have to wait. I explained to teachers that you might have to wait 15 seconds for a little kid to respond when you say, now use your language. Now, if you get in their face and you do this, all that does is make them freeze. That's like clicking on the computer too many times. And now you've told it to open up the web page 5 times. You got to click once and wait. And I had the computer guy explain to me that that you keep clicking on it, it then tries to open Google 5 times. That's not the thing to do. Slow processor speed. It explains a lot of things where I have a problem. It's
brilliant. I heard you. One of the things I talk about is how these, with my son, he's 19. A lot of the behaviors that we have to manage when he becomes angry or frustrated or even sad and depressed, I can usually draw a direct line between that behavior and the frustration in him not being able to communicate something.
Oh, that's a huge frustration. And I tell parents, okay, we're going to work with little kids, getting them to talk. They don't start talking right away. You've got to give them some other way to communicate, sign language, a picture board, something to communicate with. And it can be something simple. Yeah, there's all kinds of fancy electronic devices, and they're nice, but even just a simple picture board they can point to. Because I can remember the frustration of not being able to communicate. I was 5, and I had learned how to talk, but I was still a very, very slow responder. I was like that Intel 286 or that phone with 1 bar service. And in kindergarten, we had a little assignment with pictures, and I had to mark all the pictures that began with a B as in beautiful. So there was a picture of a bicycle, and I didn't mark it because I had a trike. And I didn't mark I marked the suitcase picture for B for bag, because in our houses they were bags. And they didn't give me time to explain why I marked the pictures the way I did, because I did know my B concept. And I said, well, in our house we call those bags, and on the train it's the baggage car. So I understood the B concept. And they didn't give me time to explain that, and that was so frustrating. And they just marked it wrong, and threw it back at me. I was horribly frustrated. I was 5 when that happened.
That's brilliant. You've told a story of how the day you didn't want to wear the hat, and you got so frustrated at your mom, and you threw the hat out the window of the car on the highway.
Yep, and I got in a bad accident and totaled the car. We were lucky we weren't killed. Got sideswiped by a semi, and he drove off in a ditch to avoid killing us. And I remember that very well, and I learned a new word, ice. There's broken glass coming in around me. Saying, ice. And
looking back, you now recognize that was a frustration at not being able to explain.
I didn't want to wear the hat. It was like too tight. I didn't like the feeling of that. You see, when we were home in the driveway, and I chucked it out on a lawn, and Mother said, get out and get the hat. And then I got this brilliant idea of throwing it out the window on the highway. But this is in the days when cars had crank windows. I was a very young child. I wasn't strong enough to work the crank window in the back. But Mother had the driver's side window open. I reached over her shoulder and chucked it. And then she swerved, and we got hit by a red semi-truck.
And that's just a perfect example of how this challenge in communication can cause frustration and directly impact behavior.
We've got to have a way to communicate. And, we can argue whether you use sign language or a picture board. I always want to, go with the things that are easy. Yes, it's nice to have the fancy communication devices, but if you can't get that, even just a simple picture board can be used, and you can make that.
We touched on this earlier, but I wanted to hit it again, the sensory processing part of this. And I believe I've been preaching for a long time that I don't need to make first responders experts on autism. That's not my role.
There's certain critical control points. And one of the things is the person with autism is like a phone with 1 bar of service or a computer with a horrible internet connection. it's slow to respond. This is a very basic principle. So when it comes to first responders, then they panic. And then when they panic, they either will act out or they freeze.
And can we talk about this for a minute? It's unfortunate, but a lot of the behaviors we are trained as police officers, especially in the areas of intoxication, I'm sure you've seen psychophysical tests being done. Heel to toe walk on a white line.
I can't do a heel to toe walk sober because my cerebellum's undersized. I have a balance problem. And so I have a rule. If I have to drive, it's one sip of wine and that's it. One sip. All I will have. Or none.
And also,
well, breathalyzer to come up 0. Usually if I have to drive, well, I might take a couple of sips to taste it and that's it.
So let me ask you, if you did have a sip of wine and you got stopped by a police officer and he puts you through these tests, heel to toe walk or touch your nose, proprioception.
Well, my nose, I can, well, wait a minute, I'm looking at the video. Yeah, I can do the touch my nose. But the toe walking, now I had a therapist teach me a way to make it easier to do that by sighting on something like how ballet dancers and skaters sight on, maybe one person in the audience, or I might sight on a tree or something like that. That helped with the toe walking. But if I don't sight on something, I'll fall over. I can't do it. Never have done it. And this is why in skiing, I would say, oh, my kids were one semester. They could do the beautiful Christies like this down the hill, keeping them together. No matter how many lessons I had, I just couldn't do it.
Have you ever had a meltdown? Have you ever just been overloaded with sensory information? Is that something you've had to deal with?
Well, one thing, when I got bullied in high school, I responded by getting in fights. And I got horseback riding taken away for 2 weeks for doing that when I was probably 15. And I switched from anger to crying. So now when I get overloaded, I just learn that if I cry, I don't get in trouble for that.
That's interesting.
In fact, when NASA canceled the space shuttle, I looked at the saddest 60 Minutes. And I think a lot of those scientists that worked on that were autistic. They were breaking down and crying and walking off camera. And I was crying. And, NASA space scientists cried when the project was canceled. I tell parents, I got a picture of some space shuttle stuff that I've shown. And I said, NASA, boys can cry. Boys that cry don't go to jail. They don't get in trouble. And they can be NASA space scientists. And when their projects get canceled, they cry. And just thinking about this, I get upset. I couldn't get through that show without crying.
That's a brilliant insight.
Where, if you cry, you don't go, you don't fighting and go to jail for that. Crying, I'm not going to go to jail for.
I've seen that in my son. It seems to him that anger is a more accessible emotion for him than sadness. It seems to be an easier, more efficient expression for him than
your son fully verbal.
Verbal expressive language is a challenge for him.
Okay.
A lot of scripting, a lot of echolalia, a lot of scripting.
A lot of echolalia, but sometimes when they do echolalia, they don't know what it means when they recite an entire TV script.
Correct.
And there's a book called Life Animated, where what was done in that was the kid had memorized a Disney movie, and they took phrases out of that movie and put them into real life. So then the child started to understand that the words had meaning. I was the kind of person where I had some receptive problems where if the adults talked fast, I went to gibberish. And then I had some problems with expressive where I just couldn't get it out. Like a big stutter. I couldn't get the language out. I was never echolalic, where I would repeat something or memorize a TV script. And some of the individuals that are echolalic memorize a TV script and they don't know what it means.
Right.
See, this is where you have different kinds of language disorders.
My son has known the script to Finding Nemo for 15 years, but he doesn't understand the humor. He doesn't understand the he'll recite it verbatim and it'll be perfect with voice inflection and pauses. And you're right, but there's no underlying comprehension.
Now, have you ever tried taking some phrases from Finding Nemo and working them into real conversation, where they can be worked into real conversation accurately? Because this is what was done in the book Life Animated.
Yes, and that has been a fascinating thing to work with. And it's interesting too. Now, when he's having an emotion, he will find and search for his favorite TV shows or movies on YouTube to match that emotion. Like if he's angry, he'll
trying to make the connection.
Yeah.
You see, in the beginning, and they say it absolutely perfectly. You see, my language is a lot slower and choppier. So there's basically 3 ways the brain can be messed up on speech. Don't hear it clearly. Sounds like gibberish, especially if there's background noise. Can't get it out, that's expressive. And then echolalic, where they might repeat a movie script, but they have no idea what it means. Those are your 3 ways that language can be messed up in the brain. And then obviously, of course, it's not a cleft palate or something like that would affect language.
I want to apologize to the audience because I'm hijacking Dr. Grandin, speaking of my son, and it's just an honor to talk to you. And
Well, I want to get people to understand this. And I switched from anger to crying, and I would get in some problem at work, and I was doing work with big meat packing plants on designing equipment, and I'd go hide in the basement, or in one of my favorite places was electrical rooms. They had a nice sign to keep everybody out. And I knew what not to touch in an electrical room. And I'd go in electrical rooms. Every time I walk by a door of one of those rooms, I think about that.
That's a perfect segue to what I want to end with today. And I really respect your time, but I want to talk about a missing person scenario. And this is the most critical thing that we have to learn as first responders, and where to look, where these people might go, how to find them. And one of the things I really speak heavily on, and I'm very adamant about, is I don't like the term wandering. And you see a lot of these things like wandering prevention, and I don't like the word wandering because it kind of connotes a randomness. The definition of wandering in a dictionary is to move about without a fixed aim, course, or goal. And I believe that when an individual with autism goes missing, they are not wandering. It's not random. They're driven by a motivation. They are either going towards something or they are being repelled by something. What are your thoughts on that? That we have to approach these calls when these individuals go missing as looking for intellectually capable beings out there that are not just robots wandering around.
Well, if it's out of fear, they're going to go to some place they might think is safe. That might be similar to a horse that runs back into a burning barn, which is obviously not safe. But you see that was his stall was a previous safe place. But the other thing I think we need to be doing is that individuals, with various communication disorders also need to be trained that, let's say somebody has a hazmat suit on, white Tyvek things. I can tell you right now, you put one of those on, the animals haven't seen it before. They react with panic. And we need to be teaching these kids how to respond to firefighters and police officers.
And I want to speak to this too and ask your opinion. The stat staggers me every time I think of it. 90% of deaths for kids on the autism spectrum under the age of 14 is drowning. Drowning.
They need to be taught to swim. They need to be taught to swim. I just heard a show on the radio just the other day driving home from the airport about teaching kids, especially inner city kids, to swim. They need to be taught to swim.
But let me ask you, let me ask your opinion. What in your opinion is the attraction? 90%. That is a statistic you don't see.
No, I know it. Well, I used to love the splash of water. My sister and I would take these little orange juice cans, and orange juice concentrate came in the bathtub. We would pour the water from one can to another. We thought orange juice cans were the great bathtub toys, and just liked watching how it poured. Well, I was taught to swim at a very young age. We need to be teaching these kids how to swim.
I think you're hitting on it. It comes back to sensory. I think they're drawn towards water for sensory reasons, whether it's watching the.
Well, I used to we'd be at the beach, and you'd get down where the sand is saturated with water, and I'd dribble sand through my hands. I'd watch all the little tiny particles, little micro rocks going through my hands, and when I'd take the juice cans and just pour it back and forth, I liked watching it. No, I think we've got to teach these kids how to swim.
Dr. Grandin, I want to again say thank you. This has been it's been one of the great honors for me to speak to you.
Well, I want to help them, try to give practical, helpful advice. And I find that, like, kind of explain it in electronic terms, like a slow internet connection or a phone with one bar of service. I think that people can understand that. And then I used to do this to my computer. Google wouldn't open up fast, so I clicked on it 5 times in a row. And finally, Chris, my computer guy, says, you got to stop doing that. You just told it to open 5 times. You click once and you wait.
And that seems to be very challenging for police officers, especially to embrace. We work in a field where a lot of times, just for real good reasons, we need to take physical control of a scene. We need compliance right now, right away. We need information quickly, and a lot of times it's challenging for a police officer to stop and pause and allow processing and allow something to breathe.
This is the thing. The first thing the police officer has to know about it. Okay, a traffic stop is not, in most cases, a total emergency situation. Okay, and you're talking about 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. It's, you see, the first thing is they have to be aware of this problem. The other thing I remember being taught is, because police officers worry about their own safety, if my license is down on the floor and I reach for it, he might think I'm reaching for a gun. So I remember this California thing. They said, well, put your hands here where they can see it. And then if your license isn't, to tell them where you're going to reach to get your license. It's in the back seat in my purse. It's on the floor in my, my backpack, whatever.
It's brilliant. Dr. Grandin, I want to thank you. I promised myself when I started this podcast I would keep these short. So I want to thank you for your time, and thank you for what you do and your work, and for everything you've done to the countless families across the world, and for your insights and your wisdom. I hope I can amplify that and do some good. And thank you for your time. Okay, well, great. Thank you for having me. I'm going to leave the studio now, and I hope I've given you some insights. You've been remarkable. Thank you again, man. Great. All right. Goodbye. Goodbye. For more information on booking an individual or agency autism response training, visit my website at www.bluebridgetraining.com.